The glass doors of the boutique slammed shut behind Clara, the sound echoing like a slap in the quiet street. Her worn sneakers squeaked on the polished marble steps as she stumbled backward, clutching her old canvas bag. Her cheeks burned, not from the chilly morning air, but from the sting of humiliation. Inside, the saleswoman's sneers still lingered in her mind, their sharp voices ringing in her ears. "This isn't a thrift store, lady. Get out before we call security." Clara's heart pounded as she stood frozen on the sidewalk, her simple blue dress fluttering in the wind. Shoppers passing by stared, some whispering, others pretending not to notice. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement, but then, through the boutique's giant windows, she saw the head saleswoman, Ms. Evelyn, point at her and laugh, her red lipstick curling into a cruel smirk. Clara's hands trembled as she gripped her bag tighter. She hadn't done anything wrong. All she wanted was to buy a gift-a-small, shiny bracelet for her daughter's birthday. But the moment she stepped into the fancy boutique, with its glittering chandeliers and shelves of sparkling jewelry, the staff had looked at her like she was dirt. Her plain clothes, her messy bun, her lack of makeup, they judged her before she even spoke. "We don't serve people like you, Miss." Evelyn had snapped, her high heels clicking as she marched Clara to the door. And now, here she was, kicked out, her face hot with shame and her heart heavy with failure. What Clara didn't know, what nobody in that boutique knew, was that in exactly 1 hour, a sleek black SUV would pull up to the curb. Its tinted windows would hide the man inside, a man whose name alone could make the boutique's owners tremble, a man who loved Clara more than life itself. And when that SUV arrived, everything would change. But for now, Clara stood alone, her breath shaky, tears prickling her eyes. She took a step back, her sneakers scraping the pavement, and whispered to herself, "I just wanted to make her happy." Who was she talking about? And why was she so determined to step into a place that clearly didn't want her? The answer lay in the hours before, in a story of love, loss, and a secret so big it could turn the world upside down. The morning had started like any other in Clara's small, cozy apartment. The sun peeked through the faded curtains, casting soft light on the wooden table where Clara sat with a cup of tea. Her daughter, Lily, was still asleep in the next room, her soft snores drifting through the thin walls. Clara smiled as she thought of Lily's big brown eyes and the way they'd light up tomorrow when she turned 8. Clara had been saving every penny for weeks, skipping lunches and walking instead of taking the bus, just to buy something special for Lily's birthday. She didn't have much a job as a part-time cleaner, barely paid the bills, but she wanted Lily to feel like a princess, even just for one day. Clara's fingers brushed over the small pile of coins and crumpled bills on the table. $50. That's all she had. It wasn't much, but she'd heard about a sale at Lumiere Boutique, the fanciest store in town. They had a silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm, perfect for Lily. Clara had seen it in the window last week when she passed by on her way to work. It was simple but beautiful, just like her daughter. She imagined Lily's face when she opened the box, her little gasp of joy. That thought alone gave Clara the courage to put on her best dress, the one she wore to church every Sunday, and head out into the city. The walk to the boutique was long, and Clara's sneakers were starting to wear thin, but she didn't care. She hummed a little tune, thinking of Lily's smile. The city buzzed around her cars, honking, people rushing, the smell of coffee from nearby cafes. Lumiere Boutique stood out like a palace, its golden sign glowing under the morning sun. Clara hesitated at the door, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. Her dress was clean but faded, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She didn't look like the other women who shopped here, with their designer bags and shiny heels. But she squared her shoulders and pushed the door open, the bell jingling softly. The moment she stepped inside, the air changed. The boutique smelled like expensive perfume, and the lights were so bright they made the jewelry sparkle like stars. Claire's eyes widened as she took it all in the glass, cases filled with necklaces, rings, and bracelets, each one more beautiful than the last. She clutched her bag, her $50, feeling smaller and smaller in her pocket. She just needed to find the bracelet and get out. Simple. But it wasn't simple. The saleswomen, dressed in crisp black uniforms, noticed her right away. Miss Evelyn, the head saleswoman, stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes scanning Clara from head to toe. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she whispered something to another worker, who giggled. Clara's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to walk toward the counter where she'd seen the bracelet in the window display. "Excuse me," Clara said softly, her voice shaking just a little. "I'm looking for a bracelet. The one with the heart charm? It was in the window last week." Miss Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her red nails tapping the counter. "That bracelet?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's part of our exclusive collection. I'm sure it's out of your price range." She didn't even try to hide her sneer. Clara's face grew warm, but she stood her ground. "I have money," she said, reaching into her bag. "I just want to see it, please." The other saleswoman, a younger one with a tight ponytail, laughed out loud. "Oh, honey, this isn't a thrift store. Why don't you try somewhere more your level?" Clara's heart sank. She opened her mouth to argue, but Miss Evelyn cut her off. "Enough," she snapped. "You're wasting our time. Leave or I'll call security." She pointed to the door, her eyes cold and unyielding. Clara froze, her hands trembling. She wanted to say something, to tell them they were wrong about her, but the words wouldn't come. The other customers in the store were staring now, their whispers like needles in her skin. She felt small, invisible, worthless. With a shaky breath, she turned and walked toward the door. "Ms." Evelyn's heels clicking behind her like a warning. And that's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. The glass door slammed shut behind her, and Clara was left standing on the sidewalk, humiliated and alone. But as she stood there, her tears threatening to spill, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a simple woman. She was Clara, a mother who would do anything for her daughter. And she wasn't done yet. Clara's mind raced as she stood outside the boutique. She could still hear Ms. Evelyn's laughter through the glass, and it made her blood boil. She wasn't going to let them win. Not today. Not when Lily's birthday was tomorrow. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. Should she call him? She hadn't wanted to. She'd promised herself she wouldn't. But maybe, just this once, she had no choice. Her thumb pressed the contact labeled H. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Clara's heart pounded. What if he didn't answer? What if he was too busy? But then, a deep, familiar voice came through the line, calm and steady, like it always was. "Clara, what's wrong?" he asked, his tone instantly concerned. Clara swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. I need you. They kicked me out. I just wanted to buy something for Lily, and her voice cracked, and she couldn't finish. There was a pause on the other end, a silence so heavy it made Clara's stomach twist. Then, his voice came back, low and dangerous. "Where are you?" "Lumiere Boutique," she said, her eyes darting to the golden sign above her. "But it's okay, Al." "Stay there," he interrupted. "I'm coming." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knew that tone. She'd heard it only a few times before, and it always meant trouble for someone else. She slipped the phone back into her bag, her heart racing with a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain. The boutique was about to get a visitor they'd never forget. As Clara stood on the sidewalk, the minutes ticking by, The black SUV was already speeding through the city, its engine purring like a predator on the hunt. Inside, a man in a tailored suit gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with quiet rage. He was Clara's husband, a billionaire whose name sent shivers through the city's elite. And he was coming for answers. But who was he? And why had Clara, his wife, been living such a simple life, hiding in plain sight? The truth was a secret so big it could bring the boutique hand everyone in Ito their knees. And in exactly 1 hour, that truth would come roaring to the curb in a black SUV. The street outside Lumiere Boutique buzzed with the usual city hum cars whizzing by, pedestrians chatting, a street vendor calling out to sell hot pretzels. But for Clara, the world felt silent, like the calm before a storm. She stood on the sidewalk, her old canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her fingers still tingling from the phone call. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind. "Stay there. I'm coming." Those words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. A promise of something big, something unstoppable. Clara's heart raced, not just from the humiliation of being kicked out, but from the fear of what might happen when he arrived. She glanced at the boutique's gleaming windows, where Ms. Evelyn and her staff were still smirking, oblivious to the storm heading their way. Clara shifted her weight, her sneakers scuffing the pavement. She wanted to leave, to run back to her small apartment and forget this ever happened. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she had that bracelet for Lily. She pictured her daughter's face, those big brown eyes lighting up at the sight of the tiny heart charm. That image kept her rooted to the spot, even as her cheeks burned with shame and passers-by threw curious glances her way. Who was she waiting for? And why did she look so nervous, standing there in her faded dress, clutching her bag like it was her lifeline? To understand Clara's fear and her strength, you had to go back to the moments that led her to this sidewalk, to the life she'd been living in the shadows. The truth about Clara wasn't simple, and it wasn't what anyone in that boutique could have guessed. Her story was one of love, sacrifice, and a secret so big it could shatter glass doors and egos alike. The day had started with a plan, one Clara had thought through 100 times. She'd woken up early, before the sun even touched the sky, and tiptoed around her apartment so she wouldn't wake Lily. The little girl was sprawled across her bed, her favorite stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. Clara had stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep, her chest rising and falling with soft breaths. Lily was the reason for everything Clara did, the reason she worked late nights cleaning offices, the reason she saved every penny, the reason she'd walked into Lumiere Boutique knowing she didn't belong. Clara's apartment was small, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet that dripped no matter how many times she tried to fix it. But it was home, filled with love and laughter and the smell of the cookies she baked with Lily on weekends. Nobody looking at that apartment would guess Clara was married to a billionaire. Nobody would guess she'd once lived in a mansion with marble floors and chandeliers bigger than the ones in the boutique. Nobody would guess she'd walked away from all of it for a reason she still couldn't fully explain, even to herself. 3 years ago, Clara had made a choice. She'd left her husband not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him too much. His world was one of power and danger, of men in suits who made deals that could ruin lives, of secrets that could destroy everything. Clara didn't want that for Lily. She wanted her daughter to grow up safe, to have a normal life, to never know the weight of a name that carried so much fear and respect. So, Clara had packed a single bag, taken Lily, and disappeared into the city, blending into the crowd like a ghost. She'd become a cleaner, living paycheck to paycheck, keeping her head down. She hadn't seen her husband in 3 years, not until today, when she dialed his number in a moment of desperation. But who was he? Clara's husband was Alexander Kane, a name whispered in boardrooms and feared in the shadows. He was a billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing, A man whose black SUV was as famous as his temper. To the world, he was untouchable. A king in a suit who could buy anything or anyone. But to Clara, he was just Alex, the man who'd held her hand when Lily was born, who'd promised to protect them no matter what. She'd left him to keep Lily safe, but she'd never stopped loving him. And now, with one phone call, she'd pulled him back into her life. Back on the sidewalk, Clara's phone buzzed in her bag, snapping her out of her thoughts. She fumbled for it, her hands still shaky. A text from Alex. 10 minutes away, don't move. Her stomach twisted. 10 minutes. That's all the time she had before the boutique's perfect little world turned upside down. She glanced at the glass doors again, where Miss Evelyn was now helping a customer, her fake smile as bright as the jewelry she sold. Clara wondered what Miss Evelyn would do when Alex arrived. Would she laugh then? Would she sneer? Clara's mind drifted to the last time she'd seen Alex. It was 3 years ago, in the middle of the night, rain pouring outside their mansion. She'd stood in the doorway, Lily asleep in her arms, her bag packed. Alex had begged her to stay, his voice breaking in a way she'd never heard before. "You don't have to do this," he'd said. "I'll fix everything. I'll keep you safe." But Clara had shaken her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not about me," she whispered. "It's about her." She'd left him standing there, his silhouette fading in the rain as she drove away. Since then, Clara had kept her distance, changing her phone number, moving to a new part of the city. But Alex always found a way to know where she was. He never pushed, never showed up, uninvited, but she'd seen the black SUV a few times, parked at the end of her street, watching. He was keeping his promise, even from afar. And now he was coming, not just to watch, but to act. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp laugh from inside the boutique. She looked up and saw Miss Evelyn pointing at her through the window, saying something to another saleswoman. The younger one rolled her eyes and made a shooing motion with her hand, like Clara was a stray dog. Anger flared in Clara's chest, hot and fierce. She wasn't just some nobody they could laugh at. She was Clara Kane, even if she tried to forget that name. And soon, they'd know it too. The minutes ticked by, each one slower than the last. Clara paced a small circle on the sidewalk, her sneakers wearing a faint path in the dust. She kept checking her phone, her heart jumping every time a car passed. Was that him? No, just a taxi. Another Cara red sedan. Not him. She felt exposed. Standing there under the boutique's golden sign, like a spotlight was shining on her. People were starting to notice her pacing, her nervous glances. A man in a suit slowed down, eyeing her curiously before hurrying on. Clara pulled her bag closer, her fingers brushing the $50 inside. It wasn't enough for the bracelet. She knew that now. But maybe Alex could hear thoughts cut off as a low rumble filled the air. She froze, her breath catching. A black SUV turned the corner, its sleek body gleaming under the morning sun. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a panther stalking its prey. The windows were tinted so dark Clara couldn't see inside, but she knew who was behind the wheel. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. The SUV pulled up to the curb, its engine purring softly before it went silent. The boutique's doors were still, the staff inside unaware of the storm about to break. Clara took a step forward, then stopped. The driver's door opened, and a polished black shoe hit the pavement. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark suit tailored to perfection. His hair was jet black, his jaw sharp, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Alexander Kane. The air around him seemed to shift, like the world itself was holding its breath. He didn't look at Clara not yet. His gaze was fixed on the boutique, and even from the sidewalk, Clara could feel the anger radiating off him. Inside, Miss Evelyn was still chatting with a customer, her laugh loud and fake. She hadn't noticed the SUV, hadn't seen the man who could buy her store 100 times over, but Clara had, and she knew what was coming. Alex took a step toward the boutique, his movements calm but deadly, like a predator closing in. Clara's breath hitched. She wanted to call out, to stop him, but her voice was stuck in her throat. Then, just as Alex reached for the door, a loud crash came from inside the boutique. Glass shattered. Someone screamed, and Miss Evelyn's face went pale as she spun toward the sound. Clara's eyes widened. What was happening? Had someone else beaten Alex to the punch? Or was this something else entirely, a new twist in a day already spinning out of control? The crowd's whispers buzzed like bees around Lila as she stood frozen on the sidewalk, the black SUV looming in front of her. The man in the suit, with his sharp jaw and calm eyes, held the back door open, waiting. "Mrs. Carter, please," he said again, his voice steady but urgent. Lila's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Mrs. Carter. Her name, yes, but it felt strange, like it belonged to someone else. The shadowy figure inside the SUV hadn't moved, but their presence felt like a storm about to break. The boutique staff, still pressed against the glass of Glamour Elite, looked like statues, their mouths half open. Karen, the manager who'd thrown Lila out, clutched her clipboard, her knuckles white. The crowd outside shifted, some pulling out their phones to record. Lila's cheeks burned under their stares. She wanted to run, to hide in her tiny apartment and forget this awful day. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, made her take a shaky step toward the SUV. Who's in there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man in the suit didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Someone who's been looking for you, Mrs. Carter. Please, get in." Lila's stomach twisted. She glanced back at the boutique, at the faces of the staff who'd mocked her, at the crowd who'd laughed. Then she looked at the open door of the SUV, its dark interior like a mystery waiting to swallow her. She took a deep breath, clutched her denim bag, and stepped forward. The man nodded and helped her into the car. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the world outside vanished. Inside, the SUV smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The seats were soft, softer than anything Lila had ever touched. Across from her sat a man in a tailored suit, his face half hidden in the dim light. His hair was dark, streaked with silver, and his eyes sharp and familiar locked onto hers. Lila's breath caught. It was James. Her James. But he looked different. Not the scruffy, kind-eyed man who ate cheap noodles with her in their tiny kitchen. This James was polished, powerful, like a king on a throne. "Lila," he said, his voice low and warm, but with an edge she didn't recognize. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared up